The retired colonel's hands were trembling when he reached for my wrist. He didn't ask permission. He didn't introduce himself. He simply turned my arm so the bracelet caught the overhead light, and every trace of color drained from his face. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. The ballroom behind us was full of laughter, clinking glasses, men in dark suits shaking hands and trading old war stories. None of it seemed to exist anymore. Just this man, his grip on my wrist, and the fear behind his eyes. "It belonged to my grandmother," I said. "She passed away 6 weeks ago." He released my arm slowly, like he was handling something fragile. "We need to speak somewhere private," he said, "right now." That was the moment I understood that my grandmother, the woman my own family let die alone in a county hospital, was not the person any of us believed she was. My grandmother, Eleanor Marsh, lived in a small, faded house at the end of a gravel road outside Whitfield, Tennessee. Population 3,000 on a generous day. The kind of town where the post office closed at noon and everyone knew whose dog had gotten into whose garden. She had lived there for as long as I could remember. Same house, same porch, same garden she tended every morning before the sun got too hot. She worked as a seamstress for most of her life, or at least that was what she told us. Alterations, repairs, the occasional wedding dress for someone in town. She had an old Singer sewing machine by the window and bolts of fabric stacked in the spare bedroom. Nothing about her life suggested anything remarkable. My parents treated her like an afterthought. To them, she was a quiet woman in a quiet town who had never done anything worth talking about. My mother once told me at Thanksgiving that Grandma Eleanor could have been something if she'd had more ambition. My father just shrugged whenever her name came up. "She likes her little life," he'd say. "Leave her to it." They rarely visited. Holidays came and went without anyone suggesting we drive the 4 hours to see her. When I called her on her birthday, she always sounded surprised, like she'd forgotten the date herself. "You didn't have to call, sweetheart," she'd say. "I know you're busy. I was never that busy. I just let myself believe I was." When she got sick, no one rushed to her side. My mother said she'd probably bounce back. My father said the hospital would handle it. My brother didn't even respond to the group text. I was working double shifts in the ER in Nashville when the neighbor called me. "Eleanor collapsed in her kitchen," she said. "She's at Whitfield County General. No one's come." I drove through the night. 4 hours of empty highway and a tightening feeling in my chest that I couldn't shake. By the time I got there, she was propped up in a hospital bed that was too big for her. Tubes running from her arm, monitors beeping softly. The room smelled like antiseptic and something older, something tired. She smiled when she saw me. That same quiet smile she'd had my whole life. Not wide, not dramatic, just warm. "You came," she said. "Of course I came." She shook her head gently. "Your parents won't. Don't be upset about it." "They will," I said. "I'll call them." "Don't," she said. "It's all right. Some people only show up for the parts they understand." I didn't know what that meant then. I do now. She died 3 days later. No last confession, no dramatic final words. She just closed her eyes during the night and didn't open them again. The nurse told me it was peaceful. I sat beside her empty bed for a long time after, holding her hand even though it had gone cold, because I couldn't figure out how to let go of someone the rest of my family had already released years ago. The funeral was small. 5 people, including me and the pastor. The neighbor who had called me came. An elderly woman I didn't recognize stood near the back, wearing dark sunglasses and a plain coat despite the heat. She left before I could speak to her. My parents sent flowers with a card that said, "With sympathy." My brother texted, "Sorry, I couldn't make it. Work stuff." I stood alone by the grave while they lowered the casket and thought about every holiday she spent by herself, every phone call that lasted 3 minutes because no one had anything to say to her, every time my father changed the subject when I mentioned her name. I didn't cry. I just felt heavy, like something had settled into my bones and planned to stay. After the service, I went to her house to sort through her things. My parents had already asked how quickly it could be listed. "No sense letting it sit empty," my mother said. Most of what I found was ordinary. Old dresses, worn cookbooks, a shelf of paperback novels, stacks of fabric she'd never use. In the kitchen, a calendar from last year still hung on the wall, with nothing written on any of the days. Then I found the bracelet. It was in her bedroom, inside a wooden box tucked behind her sewing machine. The box itself was unremarkable, just a plain container with no lock. But the bracelet inside was different, silver, slightly tarnished, with a clasp that still worked. On the inside surface, etched into the metal, was a series of small symbols I didn't recognize. Not decorative, not random. They looked deliberate, precise, like they meant something specific to someone who knew how to read them. I remembered seeing it on her wrist a few times when I was young. She always wore long sleeves, even in summer, so I rarely noticed it. Once, when I was maybe 12, I asked her about it. She touched it lightly and said, "It reminds me of who I was." Then, she changed the subject. I put it on, not because I thought it was valuable, but because it was hers. And now it was the only thing I had left of a woman my family had already started to forget. My parents never asked about the bracelet. They never asked about anything. Within 2 weeks, they had a realtor listing the house. My father called it handling logistics. My mother called it moving forward. I called it erasing her. I went back to Nashville. Back to the ER. Back to long shifts and strong coffee and the familiar rhythm of saving strangers. But something nagged at me. Not grief exactly, but a kind of unfinished feeling, like I had read a book and someone had torn out the last chapter. A month later, a colleague invited me to a veterans charity gala downtown. Black tie event, retired military officers, politicians, the kind of evening where people made speeches about sacrifice while eating shrimp cocktail. I went because my friend insisted. I wore a simple black dress and the bracelet without thinking about it. It had become habit by then. A quiet presence on my wrist that made me feel closer to her. The ballroom was elegant. Chandeliers and polished floors and a string quartet playing something soft. I shook hands, smiled politely, listened to stories about deployments and homecomings. I was a civilian in a room full of decorated service, and I felt slightly out of place. Then I felt someone watching me. A man, mid-60s, silver hair, straight posture. He stood near the bar with a drink he hadn't touched, and his eyes were fixed on my left wrist. Not my face. Not my dress. Just the bracelet. He set his glass down and walked toward me. Not fast, not slow. Deliberate. Like a man who had spent his life measuring every step. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was calm, but something underneath it was not. I turned to face him. "Yes?" He didn't look up. He was staring at the bracelet the way someone stares at a photograph of a person they thought was dead. "Where did you get this?" he asked. And that was when I realized something about my grandmother's bracelet that I had never considered. It wasn't jewelry. It was something else entirely. The man didn't explain himself in the ballroom. He asked for my name, my grandmother's full name, and my phone number. He wrote everything on the back of a business card with a pen he pulled from his jacket. Then he nodded once, said he'd be in touch, and walked away without looking back. I stood there for a long time, turning the bracelet on my wrist, feeling the weight of it differently than I ever had before. That night, I called my mother. "Do you know anything about Grandma's bracelet?" I asked. "The silver one she used to wear?" There was a pause. "Vaguely," she said. "Some old thing. Why?" A man at a charity event recognized it. A military officer. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. My mother laughed softly. "Your grandmother had a way of making things seem more important than they were. She probably bought it at a yard sale." He asked for her full name. "Mom, people are strange, sweetheart. Don't read into it." I pressed further. "Did Grandma ever talk about her past? Before Whitfield?" "There was nothing before Whitfield," my mother said. "She lived there her whole life. She sewed dresses and grew tomatoes. That was her world." But something in her voice wavered. Just slightly. My father was worse. When I brought it up the following weekend, he sighed the way he always did when he found a conversation inconvenient. "Your grandmother was a simple woman," he said. "She didn't have secrets. She didn't have stories. She had a sewing machine and a garden." "Then why did someone important react like that to her bracelet?" "Because you're looking for meaning where there isn't any," he said. "You're grieving. That's fine. But don't turn her into something she wasn't." I wanted to argue. Instead, I hung up and stared at the bracelet under my kitchen light. The symbols were small but sharp, etched with precision. Not the work of a yard sale. Not decoration. Something functional, something coded. 2 days later, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. This is Colonel David Engram, retired. I would like to speak with you regarding your grandmother, Eleanor Marsh. Please contact my office at your earliest convenience. No subject line, no pleasantries, just that. I didn't tell my parents. The address led me to a quiet office near a Veterans Resource Center outside Nashville. A small building, American flag out front, nothing dramatic. The receptionist nodded when I gave my name, like she'd been expecting me. Colonel Engram was waiting in a plain room. No medals on the wall, no photographs, just 2 chairs, a desk, and a glass of water he had already poured for me. "I owe you an apology," he said as I sat down. "I shouldn't have approached you the way I did at the gala." "You recognized the bracelet," I said. "Yes." He folded his hands on the desk, and I wasn't prepared to see it on someone so young. "It was my grandmother's, Eleanor Marsh." He nodded slowly. "I know." The way he said her name made something tighten behind my ribs. "You knew her?" I asked. "Not personally," he said. "But I knew of her, and I knew what that bracelet represents." "What does it represent?" He studied me for a moment, the way someone decides how much truth a person can handle. "Your grandmother was part of a program that doesn't appear in any official record," he said. "It was active during the Cold War and involved civilian operatives embedded in ordinary communities. Their job was to support intelligence operations without any connection to the military or the government." I stared at him. "My grandmother was a seamstress. That was her cover," he said quietly, "and she maintained it flawlessly for over 30 years. My pulse was pounding. "What exactly did she do?" "She served as a communication relay," he said. "A handler of information passed between operatives in the field and analysts at secure facilities. Her home, her sewing shop, her ordinary life, all of it was designed to be invisible. And it worked. So the bracelet, it's an identifier," he said. "Issued to individuals cleared for work that was never supposed to be acknowledged. Most of them were destroyed after the program ended. A few were kept, quietly, by the people who wore them." "She kept hers." "Yes." His voice softened. "Some people need proof that they existed, even if the world was told they didn't." I thought about her words. "It reminds me of who I was." "My family had no idea," I said. "They thought she wasted her life." The colonel's expression tightened. "That is often the cost of this kind of service," he said. "You don't get recognition. You don't get gratitude. You get a quiet life in a small town, and if you're lucky, someone remembers you after you're gone." I felt heat behind my eyes. "She died alone," I said. "In a county hospital with no one beside her except me." He was silent for a moment. "That," he said, "is the part that never gets easier to hear." I drove home that night feeling like the road had shifted underneath me. Every mile between Nashville and my apartment felt different, like I was traveling through a version of the world I hadn't known existed an hour before. The radio played something I didn't hear. Traffic moved around me in a blur. When I got home, I sat on my bedroom floor with the wooden box from her house. I opened it again and looked at everything more carefully. Beneath where the bracelet had been, I found a thin envelope I'd missed before. Inside was a folded piece of paper, handwritten in her careful, precise script. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you cared enough to look through an old woman's things. That tells me everything I need to know about you. There are parts of my life I could never explain. Not to your mother, not to your father, not to anyone." That was the arrangement. "But I want you to know this. I don't regret what I did. I only regret what it cost the people I loved. If someone ever asks about the bracelet, tell them the truth. That it was mine, and that you were the one I trusted. That will be enough." I read it 3 times. Then I sat there holding it, realizing that my grandmother had known this moment would come. She just hadn't known who would find it or when. The next day, I drove to Whitfield. Not to the house, the new owners had already moved in. I went to the small library where Grandma used to volunteer on Saturday mornings, shelving books and reading to children. The librarian, a woman in her 70s named Doris, remembered her immediately. "Ellie Marsh," she said, smiling. "Quietest woman in town. Never missed a Saturday for 20 years. "Did she ever talk about her past?" I asked. Doris thought about it. "No," she said. "But she listened like someone who had lived through more than she let on. You could see it in her eyes." I asked about the bracelet. Doris shook her head. "I saw it once," she said. I asked about it and she just smiled and said it was from another life. I figured she meant a relationship. It wasn't, I said. No, Doris replied quietly. I'm starting to think it wasn't. I visited 3 more people in town that week. The man who ran the hardware store said she'd helped him fix his truck once and knew more about engines than anyone he'd ever met. The woman at the church said she had donated money anonymously every Christmas for 15 years. The postal carrier said she received a plain brown envelope once a year with no return address, and she always seemed a little shaken after opening it. A pattern was forming. Not of a simple woman living a simple life, but of someone who had built a carefully constructed world around herself and maintained it with quiet discipline for decades. That weekend, I went to my parents' house. My mother was reorganizing the living room when I arrived. This is a surprise, she said. Everything okay? I placed the letter on the kitchen table. Read this, I said. She picked it up, scanned the first few lines, and frowned. Where did you find this? In Grandma's house, hidden under the bracelet. My mother read it slowly. Then again, her hands tightened on the paper. This doesn't make sense, she whispered. It does, I said. I met with a retired colonel. He confirmed it. Grandma was part of a classified intelligence program during the Cold War. Her entire life in Whitfield was a cover. My mother sat down heavily. That's impossible. She was a seamstress. That's what she wanted you to think. My father walked in from the garage, wiping his hands on a rag. He saw the letter on the table and my mother's face and stopped. What's going on? I told him everything. The bracelet, the colonel, the program, the truth. He didn't react at first. He just stood there, rag in hand, staring at the letter like it was written in a language he didn't speak. All those years, he said finally. I thought she had nothing to offer. She had everything to offer, I said. You just never asked. My mother's eyes were red. She never told us. Because you never wanted to hear it, I replied. Every time I mentioned visiting her, you changed the subject. Every time she called, you kept it short. You decided who she was before she ever had a chance to show you. The kitchen went quiet. My brother had been listening from the hallway. He stepped in, arms crossed. She asked me to come fix her porch railing last spring, he said. I told her I'd get to it. I never did. My mother covered her mouth. She didn't die because she was forgotten, I said. She died because we all decided she wasn't worth remembering. My father set the rag down on the counter. His hands were shaking. I spent my whole life measuring people by what they showed me, he said. And I missed the most important person in my family. No one argued. No one deflected. The room just sat with the weight of it. A week later, I met Colonel Engram one more time. He brought a thin folder and 2 other people, a man and a woman, both in their 60s, both carrying themselves with a kind of discipline that doesn't come from civilian life. These documents have been partially declassified, the colonel said, placing them in front of me. I can't show you the full operational details, but what remains should give you a sense of your grandmother's contribution. The pages were mostly redacted, black lines covering names, locations, dates. But between the gaps, I could see the outline of something vast. Communication networks established in rural areas across the Southeast. Intelligence relayed through civilian channels that no one would ever think to monitor. Dozens of operations supported over the span of 3 decades. And one phrase that appeared again and again next to a blacked-out name. Primary Asset E.M. E.M., I said. The colonel nodded. Eleanor Marsh. The woman beside him spoke for the first time. Your grandmother helped protect the identities of field operatives stationed in hostile territory, she said. There are people alive today because she never broke cover. Not once. Not in 31 years. Why wasn't she ever honored? I asked. Because honoring her would reveal the network she helped build, the colonel replied. And parts of that network are still relevant today. I stared at the papers. The quiet woman with the garden and the sewing machine had spent her entire adult life carrying a secret that could have endangered lives if she ever spoke about it. She didn't even tell her own daughter, I said. No, the colonel replied, and that kind of silence requires a strength most people never have to develop. That night, I sat in my car outside my apartment for almost an hour. I didn't cry. I just thought about every small moment I'd ever had with her, the way she could sit in silence without it feeling uncomfortable. The way she listened more than she spoke. The way she always seemed to know exactly what someone needed before they asked for it. I had always assumed that was just her personality. Now I understood it was a skill, one she had trained for and practiced every single day of her hidden life. 2 weeks later, my family held a second gathering. Not a funeral, just a small memorial at the cemetery in Whitfield. My parents came, my brother came, the neighbor who had called me came, Doris from the library came. The hardware store owner came. Even the colonel attended, standing quietly at the back in a plain dark suit. There were no speeches about heroism, no flags, no salutes, just people sharing small memories. The time she brought soup to a sick neighbor and stayed to clean the kitchen. The time she taught a teenager how to sew a button and ended up teaching him how to mend a torn jacket. The time she sat with the librarian's husband during his last days because his own children lived too far away to come. My father stood by the headstone. "I thought she was invisible," he said. "Turns out she was everywhere. I just wasn't looking." My mother placed a small bundle of wildflowers from the garden Grandma used to tend. "I kept telling myself she was fine alone," she said. "I think I just didn't want to feel guilty for not being there." My brother knelt and touched the stone. "I should have fixed that porch railing," he said quietly. I stood behind them, the bracelet warm on my wrist, and felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not closure, just a deep, slow understanding that the woman we had overlooked had spent her life making sure the world kept turning, and the only thanks she ever expected was the quiet knowledge that she had done her part. After everyone left, I stayed. I sat on the grass beside the headstone and watched the late afternoon light move through the trees. "I found your letter," I said. "And you were right. I was the one who looked." The wind moved gently across the hillside. No answer, no sign. But something loosened inside my chest that had been tight for weeks. Later that month, Colonel Engram sent me a final letter. He was relocating and closing his local office. Inside the envelope, he had written a short note. "Your grandmother once told a colleague that the highest form of strength is doing what matters without anyone ever knowing you did it. I hope her family has come to understand that. I believe they have." I placed the letter in the wooden box beside the bracelet, the note she had written, and a photograph of her standing in her garden, sleeves rolled up for once, the bracelet visible on her wrist, a rare half-smile on her face. That box doesn't feel like a container for secrets anymore. It feels like proof that the quietest lives are often the fullest ones. We just have to learn how to look. My family is different now. Not in a dramatic, overnight way. In a slow, careful way, like people relearning a language they forgot they once spoke. My parents visit Whitfield every few months. They bring flowers to the cemetery and stop at the library to donate books in her name. My brother finally fixed the porch railing on the old house, even though it belongs to strangers now. He told me he just needed to do it. We talk about her more, not with guilt, though that's still there, with curiosity, with respect, with the kind of attention we should have given her when she was alive. My mother asked about the bracelet recently. "Do you still wear it?" she said. "Every day," I replied. "Does it make you sad?" I thought about it. "No," I said. "It reminds me to pay attention." She nodded slowly. I wish I had paid attention sooner. I still work in the ER. I still pull long shifts and drink too much coffee and try to save the people who come through the doors at 3 in the morning. But I notice things now that I didn't before. The elderly man who sits alone in the waiting room without complaining. The woman who brings homemade cookies for the nurses and never leaves her name. The janitor who hums quietly while mopping the hallway at midnight and knows every patient on the floor by name. The quiet ones. They are everywhere, if you learn to see them. And maybe that's my grandmother's real legacy. Not the classified work she did. Not the secrets she carried. Not the bracelet or the letter or the box of hidden things. But the simple, stubborn belief that a life lived in service doesn't need applause to matter. That strength doesn't have to announce itself. That the people who hold the world together are often the ones no one remembers to thank. So, if you're listening to this, and you recognize that feeling, if there's someone in your life who sits at the edge of the room, who helps without being asked, who carries more than they let on, don't wait. Don't assume they're fine. Don't tell yourself you'll visit next month or call next week. Go now. Ask them about their life. Listen without rushing, because sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones who never once asked to be noticed. And by the time you realize what they were, It might be too late to tell them you finally see. Thank you for listening. If this story stayed with you, I'd be grateful if you shared it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you'd like to hear more stories about the quiet people who shape our lives in ways we don't always understand, you're always welcome here. This is Calm Bearing, and we'll see you next time.